Now, this is the video where everything kind of comes together. We are going to be able to take basically any transient of a kick, any body of a kick, and kind of put it together. And then we can do it in a phase coherent way and in a way that lets you have independent control over the processing of the transient and the sustain. And to get the best results, it really boils down to you finding a bunch of kicks that you like. Look for kicks that have a nice transient. Look for kicks that have a nice kind of body or sustain. So if you're in a club and you hear a kick that's just like enormous, find out what the track is and then swipe it. And then if you're looking at a sample pack and you find some kicks that sound really good, just save those to a folder, because then you can kind of combine all these awesome kicks that you like that have great transients, that have great sustain portions in a way that's phase coherent and in a way that fits whatever track you're working in. And this is the power of it. This is why you're not going to have any problems with your kick ever again, because you're going to start with great samples that you like, that maybe fit the sound that you're after, but then you also have now the control to process them in a way that's going to fit your track. Is the transient right? Is it the right sound? We'll go get the right sound, and maybe it's the right sound, but it needs a little bit something extra, so you now know how to process that transient. Is the sustain portion right? If it's not the right sound, go find the right sound. And then, of course, you can process it independently. And that's what this video is going to show you how to do. It's going to give you that power. And so this is what I call the Frankenstein kick rack, because we're just kind of combining all these kind of crazy things. But it's very powerful. And so let's go ahead and start. I'm just going to create a MIDI track. And we need to create a chain of two simpler instruments. So let's drag simpler onto the channel, and I'm going to group this. We're going to open up the chains and we're going to duplicate this simpler instrument. Perfect. And then we'll just name them transient and sustain. And this is the starting point basically. Next, what we need to do is get the LFO tool to help us sculpt the transient and the sustain. So I made a kick split rack that you can actually download. It's a couple videos ago, in case you didn't know. But let's grab that guy. All right, the ZERMELO kick split rack here. And so I'm just going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to take the transient LFO tool and just paste it right onto the transient chain here in our instrument rack. And I'm going to take the sustain LFO tool and just drop it right into the sustain chain. That way I don't have to kind of redraw everything. I'm also going to take the monitor LFO tool and the glue compressor. I'm going to move it outside just so we have them. And let's just get rid of this guy and we're pretty much good to go. This is basically the Frankenstein kick rack. All right, let's draw in some MIDI and start getting to work here. Awesome. So here we go. We have the transient LFO tool, we have the sustain LFO tool, and we have the monitoring. So all we have to do now is just start dropping in samples. Now, in the last video, we sampled a couple tracks, so let's just have fun with those for a second. So this is Hanging Tree. Now that's got a really nice transient, really warm, punchy kind of transient. So we'll just drop that in as I've already done here. And then when we play this back, the only thing we're going to see is signal in the transient chain and then a transient here in the monitoring LFO tool. And that's it. Okay, what we need to do though is also turn the transient chain up a little bit. So we're going to go to -8 in simpler because simpler turns it down a little bit. I think I already did that. Oh, here's the sustain channel. Let's do that for the sustain channel as well. And then another kick that we sampled was the poly kick. And so let's drop the poly kick into the sustain chain. So let's check out the sustain. I'm going to solo the sustain. And of course, all we're going to see is a signal in here and the sustain portion in here. Cool, so let's go ahead and play them together now. Now realize that there's overlap right around here, okay? And so this is kind of the portion where we're worried maybe that there's gonna be phase issues, but let's see what happens. Okay, so it worked out absolutely perfectly. There are 0 phase issues here, so that's kind of nice. And instead we're just left with a super punchy kick drum. A Frankenstein kick of these two. Now this isn't always the case, okay? Sometimes there's going to be some phase issues. Let me show you exactly what phase issues would look like and how you can deal with them, okay? Now the funny thing is the way that you deal with phase issues is the exact way that I'm going to actually create the phase issues right now. But I'm going to come over to the sustain channel, and I'm always going to work on the sustain channel for this, but I'm going to turn off snap. And if I start changing the starting point of this sample, of the sustain, then that's going to start changing the relationship between the transient overlap with the sustain overlap. And so watch right here, right in the overlap area, what happens as I change the starting point of the sustain portion of the kick. Check this out. See how now we're changing things. Things are starting to get out of phase because they're canceling. I'm not really worried about things being in phase. What I'm worried about is them canceling each other out. I don't want them to cancel each other out like this. So let's keep going here. So it's just getting more and more out of phase. And so if this was the case, if we started with this, then the way to get this back in phase is to simply change the starting point. Now, in this case, all we have to do is go right back to the beginning. And now we're way back in phase, and that's awesome. Now, you might be wondering, well, this is interesting because this kick is an F sharp. See right here, hanging tree F sharp, and this kick is a G sharp. So isn't that going to cause problems? Well, number one, no, it's not causing problems right now. But number two, the fundamental or the pitch of the kick is going to be determined by the sustain portion of the sound. This is just giving you a nice little knock at the beginning, but it's too quick of a sound to really have a resonating pitch. It really doesn't have a resonating pitch because the transient of a kick is the portion of the pitch envelope that's moving exponentially down. And so there's not really any definite pitch to the transient of a kick if it's like a 909 style, which is just a pitch envelope. And so as we move into the sustain portion of a kick, that's when a kick starts to generate a resonating frequency because the pitch envelope starts to level out. It's horizontal, meaning that it's playing back at one single frequency. And so that's right here. So when you're creating a kick, the pitch of your kick is going to be determined by the sustain portion, okay? And so this kick is going to be a G sharp here. Now, the great thing about this technique as well is, let's say that you actually want to have your kick be a G. And so here we have a G sharp. We want it to be a G, maybe because our bass line is in G or whatever. But if you wanted to change it, that'd be very easy. Let's just come over to controls, and we're just going to drop the transpose by one semitone, changing this sustain kick from a G sharp down to a G. So right here, we're starting to get out of phase. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to change the transposition to 0. And so we're now back to it looking better, right? It's more in phase. They're boosting. It's more of a kind of a bigger sound. And so if I come back to the sustain and I transpose it down 1, again, we're going to get the phase issues. Okay, now how do we resolve that? We already went over it. We just have to go over to the sample, and we're going to start changing the starting point until the cancellation becomes less of a problem. So kind of somewhere around there. So that sounds pretty good. I'm going to turn the glue compressor off here. It has a certain coloration to it, but I don't think I like the coloration for this sound. Let's check this out. Yeah, the coloration is just taken a little bit away from the body of the kick, from the sustain of the kick. It does give a really nice glue, as the name implies here, just a really nice warm kind of sound, but I kind of like the aggressive sound of taking it off. That's basically the gist of the Frankenstein kick rack, and now it's just up to you to use the kicks that you like, find kicks with nice transients, find kicks with a nice sustain, drop them into this rack and find a combination of sounds. Maybe it's just going to be one kick. It could totally just be one kick that just works. But a lot of times you want to find the right transient. You want to find the right sustain. And now you know how to make them work together in a phase coherent way. If they get out of phase, you know how to fix that, which is going to be probably your biggest problem, but the easiest thing to fix as well. Also, if you find a kick sustain that you really like, you can get it in key with the rest of your track easily by simply transposing the sustain channel without any problems. Again, just watch out for the phase issues, because that's going to be, again, your biggest problem. But when you have a great transient that fits your track, when you have a great sustain portion that fits your track, then you're good to go. I mean, you barely need to do anything. Maybe the only thing I would want to do here is just either a little bit of limiting or a little bit of coloration. I didn't really enjoy the coloration that the glue compressor was giving, but there's tons of like saturation plugins or compressors that would color it maybe in a nice way. And so I'd want to use those maybe to bring these together a little bit more and add just a little extra flavor of unifying color between the two. But that's the gist of it. There wouldn't really need to be anything else that I would need to do. Another thing that I do like to do though is sometimes the sustain portion isn't exactly the right length for the track. Now, if it's a little bit longer, then it's really easy to fix because you could just use this monitoring LFO tool and simply turn it into a shaper, right? So if I turn the depth up here, and I needed it to be a little bit shorter, then I can simply use the LFO tool to shape the length of the kick that I wanted. I like the punch, I like the sound of the sustain, but maybe it's just not the right length. And so I can come in here and perfectly fine tune exactly the length that I need the sustain channel to be. And if it's not long enough, then of course maybe that's obviously not the right sustain sound, and you want to find a sustain sound that's longer in the bank of kicks that you have collected. I hope you see the power in this. I hope you can see how this really just solves any potential kick problems that you could possibly have. It all boils down to getting the right sounds, but understanding that you can split the kick into transient and sustain. So finding the right transient for your track, finding the right sustain channel for your track, making sure that they're working together in a phase coherent way, and then just making the tiny little tweaks that you need to maybe glue them together and just make the perfect kick for your track. And so that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I really hope you feel more confident about approaching kicks in your tracks. You seriously have the toolbox to sculpt the perfect kick, and if you run into any problems, you have the tools now to fix those problems. And yeah, that's it. Cool.